Hey everybody, welcome to the video for lineup building for Week 10 of the NFL season over on DraftKings, going over cash game and GPP strategy. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. Spreadsheets, optimizers, ownership projections for NBA and NFL currently. The MLB and NASCAR once those seasons start up again. But if you want to check it out, link can be found down below. Also have my core plays video scheduled to go tonight at 9 p.m. if you do want to check that out as well. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're new signing over there, you can get a free money bonus. That's an instant deposit match up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think it'll be it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. My usual disclaimer before I start this video, please do not copy and paste this into all of your lineups. I'm not sure what it's going to look like yet. I don't pre-build these. I work my projections all the way up until like an hour before lock on Sunday. So I use my optimizer, put a lot more input to it. I'm recording this on Friday evening, so a lot of news can change by the time Sunday rolls around. So just apply your own favorite plays to this cash game process I'm using right now to kind of put together a nice shell cash build. We'll also talk a little bit about tournaments as well. Anyway, as I always say, if we're building a cash game lineup, what I like to do is start with the running back position because those are the most important players in our lineups. Like I'm fine using a last fill-in for whoever fits at the end for my tight end or defense or whatever. Sometimes that's totally fine. But for the running backs, we want to make sure the guys that are going to be on the field. I don't want some random running back that's getting 30% of the snaps that we hope he just falls into the end zone. I need guaranteed touches. I need good game scripts, good game environments, things like that. So we're going to head right over to the running back position. And the problem is this weekend, it's actually loaded. Last weekend, there was like 2 good running back plays, and they both busted. Ezekiel Elliott and Austin Eckler. I mean, they put up some points, but you definitely wanted a lot more than what they produced. But this weekend, no shortage of good running back plays, whether it be from the high end, the mid-range, or the cheap options. Alvin Kamara sounds like he's going to be out, so Mark Ingram could be in line for an expanded role, but we kind of have a big 4 up top. I guess if you want to make that a big 5, Ezekiel Elliott, although he's not really that expensive. I guess we could kind of make it a big 3 in terms of like the upper 7 to 8K range, although Austin Eckler is kind of right there. But Jonathan Taylor, fantastic matchup versus Jacksonville. He's a large home favorite once again. The matchups just keep being fantastic for him. He's faced Baltimore, bad run defense, Houston, San Francisco. That was just kind of like a monsoon, so it was just a big boost for the running game there. But then Tennessee, New York, like the good matchups just keep coming. Double-digit home favorite. I don't see why Jonathan Taylor won't explode once again. Had 37 points last week versus the Jets on Thursday night. 21, 22, 31, 34. And the week before that, in week 4, 23 versus Miami. So he's been on a hot stretch. Don't see why that's not going to continue here. Getting the majority of the touches. He is using the passing game as well, even though Nyheim Hines is going to take some touches away in that regard. But I mean, Jonathan Taylor should get around 20 total touches here with a handful of that being through the passing game. So love him if you have the money for him. And I think we're going to have enough money for at least one of these big spend-up options, maybe 2. We'll have to see how our line of construction looks like. But Dalvin Cook, I think he's a better tournament option than a cash game option, but it's a great spot versus the Chargers. They're currently dead last DVA versus the run, and Dalvin Cook should get you around 20 carries with a couple of targets. And this should be a pretty high-scoring game. 53.5 point over-under. It's only a 3.5 point spread currently. So it should be pretty back and forth. And Dalvin Cook, I mean, I know he's dealing with some off-the-field issues right now, but that shouldn't impact ability on the field. So definitely liking Dalvin Cook here, probably more so in tournaments because I'm assuming Najee Harris and Jonathan Taylor are going to be much higher owned than Dalvin Cook. Maybe Taylor and Dalvin Cook are closer owned than I would expect, but I think Najee Harris is probably going to end up being the chalkiest of the bunch here. It's just a great spot versus Detroit. And the way he's utilizing his offense, it's just really hard for him to bust. I know week 1 he only had 5 points, but besides that, his floor has been insanely high. 19, 31, 21, 25, 24, 21, 16 last week versus Chicago. Wasn't a great game, but he got into the end zone, only had 3 targets, which he's only had 3 targets past couple of weeks, but he still has nearly a 20% target share in this offense, and if they ever happen to be trailing, just expect a bunch of dump-offs to Najee Harris. I don't really expect that to happen. They are 8.5 point favorites at home here, but the Lions just absolutely awful versus the run. Terrible fantasy points-wise, terrible DVA-wise. Pittsburgh, 8.5 point favorites at home, which sets up well for the running back usually. So Najee Harris, whether it be on the ground or through the air, should have a very solid game here. And I actually think he's going to be the expensive option we plug in for right now. Again, Jonathan Taylor, amazing. Dalvin Cook, amazing. Austin Eckler, I'm not going to talk about too much just because if I break down every running back, we're going to be here for an hour. But out of these big 3 options, I'm leaning Najee Harris, although you can certainly make a case for literally any of them because I think they're all fantastic plays. In the mid-range, we have Ezekiel Elliott, currently questionable, assuming he's going to be good to go. Played very late in the game last week, even though they were down like 20 points, I think. So I don't think he's going to be missing this game. If he happened to, obviously Tony Pollard's there, but I would fully assume Zeke's going to play. And I think he's an excellent cash game option. I just worry about how many Cowboys I'll have in my lineup because I'm pretty sure I'm going to play Dak and Amari Cooper just because they're so cheap, and with their high implied team total, 32 points, 9-point favorites at home. Great spot versus Atlanta. All these guys are in play. I think you can play Zeke if you do use Dak and Amari Cooper just because of their price points and the matchup they're in, but I'll wait to put in Zeke at the end. If Zeke happens to fit in the flex spot, that's fine with me. If not, I don't think it's the end of the world. But the running back, I do want to plug in for right now just to make sure we get him in. So we just got news, official news, like a half hour ago, that Nick Chubb and Demetric Felton are confirmed out for the Browns due to COVID protocol. So that means Dearness Johnson with Kareem Hunt still in the IR. He is going to be pretty much the only running back there. And we saw in, I forget which week it was, but it was versus Denver on Thursday night when Dearness Johnson got the RB1 role, and that was with Demetric Felton playing. Not that he's really a running back. He's more of like a slot wide receiver, running back, gadget kind of player. But Dearness Johnson absolutely balled out in that game versus the Broncos. Had an amazing game. He's only $4,700 this week, if I can find him. Yeah, $4,700 versus New England. Bit of a tougher defense here, but they're 17th versus the run and 18th versus running backs in terms of fantasy points allowed per game. So it's not like they've been absolutely elite versus the run this year. That Week 7 game versus Denver, 22 carries, 146 yards, got into the end zone, also had 2 catches for 22 yards, nearly 30 DraftKings points. This is one of the best offensive lines in the league. I know the Browns offense can sometimes be sluggish, but they can also be very efficient at times. They're a bit of a up and down offense, but when they're on their game, they actually look quite good. They just paid their 2 offensive linemen, Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller, so I'm sure they'll be quite happy blocking on Sunday. But Dearness Johnson, $4,700 should get us around 20 total touches. Really hard not to like him because the ball's going to go somewhere, and that elite offensive line will definitely pave some open holes for him. So definitely liking Dearness, and at $4,700, you just really can't pass it up in cash games. I assume he'll be the highest owned player on the entire slate. And I'm currently projecting these two to be the highest owned running backs on the slate, although it's very close. Like Dearness Johnson is kind of a step above everybody else just because of how cheap he is. And then we're kind of like in that Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor, Ezekiel Elliott, they're like all right there together. But I am projecting these two to be the current highest running backs on the entire slate. So we'll just plug them in for cash games. Never mind eating the chalk in cash. So at this point, we can either knock out some wide receivers or plug in our quarterback. I kind of already hinted at it, so we'll just kind of make this quick. There's other quarterbacks I like besides Dak Prescott in cash games. Like you can certainly play Josh Allen. I think he's going to be very high owned this weekend. Tom Brady's in a good spot, although Antonio Brown has been confirmed out, as has Rob Gronkowski, and Chris Godwin is now a game-time decision. So if he's only left with Mike Evans, it's still a great matchup versus Washington. They're allowing the second most points per game, but it does cap his upside a bit. I think Tom Brady's a better tournament play than anything. Justin Herbert kind of in the same boat there. But Dak Prescott's too cheap. Like I mentioned, 32-point implied team total, highest in the entire slate, below 7K. I realized the Cowboys were absolutely awful last week, but he did kind of salvage his day at the very end. 2 touchdowns to like the 5th string wide receiver. Got around 20 fantasy points. Assuming they don't suck that bad once again. It was his first game back from injury, so I guess we can cut him some slack there, but should bounce back in a big way, $6,900. And if we're going to do that, you don't have to use a pass catching option with your quarterback in cash games. I don't do that a lot of times usually because when I roster a Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson, I just kind of hope they get there on the ground. But Dak Prescott's not going to come out here and run for 70 yards. So I think it would make sense to get a pass catching option with Dak. And obviously the 2 main options here, CeeDee Lamb, he's $7,000, a little pricey, but I definitely think it's deserved. The guy's an absolute stud. But I feel like we can get similar production. I don't have him projected quite as high as CeeDee Lamb, but he doesn't need to be considering he's $800 cheaper than CeeDee. He's currently got the questionable tag, but we know he's going to be good to go. This is a typical Amari Cooper thing. I know it sucked versus Denver, 5.7 points, got all those yards, I think on like the first or second drive, if I remember correctly. But only $6,200. I mean, we should push for around 5 to 10 targets here. I'll just take that cheap price point all day, hoping for a bounce back from the Cowboys, as you can see. But I definitely think it is certainly in the cards in this good matchup versus Atlanta. 55-point over-under, too. It's the highest on the entire slate. Just really hard not to like some of these Cowboys, even though they did burn us last weekend. So at this point, we have around $5,000 left for our remaining spots, which is about half our lineup. You got to keep in mind, cheap defense, probably a cheap tight end. Don't really think I'm going to spend up for a tight end unless that's Kyle Pitts, but I don't think I want to go there in cash games this weekend. So we actually have quite a bit of flexibility. I'm actually just going to plug in the cheap defense of the week. I think we all know who we're going to play. We'll expect them to be very, very high owned, especially in cash games, but it's the Titans defense. No, they're not that amazing, but they did stiff the Rams on Sunday night. But they're facing New Orleans, no starting quarterback. I guess no Alvin Kamara now. Obviously, no Michael Thomas. So there's really nobody to be scared about. They're also playing at home and they're favorites. So I don't see why we wouldn't like the Titans defense. Only $2,600. I think the Browns are a decent pivot option down low if you want to just get off a chalky defense, which I totally get in tournaments. But in cash games, just give me the Titans. I don't really think there's a reason to overthink that. If they happen to get negative 3 points, well, it's not really going to matter much because they should be like 60 to 70% owned. So if we just plug in the cheap defense, then I'll beef this up to around $5,500 left for our last few spots. Now, there's a couple of strategies we could go with. We could either go completely mid-range at wide receiver, or we could spend up for a guy like Devontae Adams, which if we happen to plug him in, I think he's too cheap this week, below $8,000, getting Aaron Rodgers back. That's $4,600 left for the last few spots, which is fine, but he's probably replacing an expensive running back in the flex spot, which, again, I think that's okay. It just doesn't feel as safe, but we'll play around with it. We'll try to do a couple different builds here and see which one looks a little bit better. So let's just go with the mid-range wide receiver first. Try to get a nice balanced lineup. So as much as I like guys like Stephon Diggs, A.J. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, already have Amari Cooper, I'm not going to go full on stack in cash games. I think Keenan Allen's a great play. Mike Evans is kind of in the mid-range here at $6,900. If Chris Godwin's out, I mean, he's pretty much the main threat outside of Tyler Johnson. He'll definitely get a nice bump, but he's always a bit boom or bust though. Like, I hate rostering Mike Evans. I don't do it in cash games, but if he's the only wide receiver left standing of the main guys, I mean, the targets are going to go somewhere. Tom Brady throws the ball nearly 40 times per game, so Mike Evans certainly should be on our radars. Washington's allowing the second most points per game to the wide receiver position, which is exactly what they're doing to quarterbacks. So, I mean, really hard not to like the Bucs. Like, even if all those guys are out, Tom Brady's still probably going to put up a lot of yards and probably throw for several touchdowns as well. He always finds the way to make it work. Deontay Johnson at $6,800, great matchup versus Detroit. He always gets peppered with targets each and every single week. Didn't really have a great game versus the Bears, only 6 targets, but before that, just a guy that's always going to get consistent volume, and he really hasn't had a bad game this year. Like, his worst game of the season was 11.7 points last week for Chicago. Then outside of that, 14.6 versus Buffalo, which we know has been pretty solid defensively this year. So I would have no problem playing him. I already have Najee Harris, though, so I'm not sure exactly how many Steelers I want to get in my cash game lineup. So I'll probably bypass Deontay and just find a little bit of a cheaper option. Mike Williams is a good play in tournaments, assuming he'll have low ownership than guys like Michael Pittman and Deontay Johnson, who we just talked about. Mike Evans is right around that same price range as well, so I think he's a decent pivot because people are going to play Keenan Allen, his teammate. But Michael Pittman, I think, is probably a good candidate to put in this lineup since we don't have Jonathan Taylor currently. I would like some Colts exposure, and Jacksonville is still 32nd DVA versus the pass, and Pittman, I know T.Y. Hilton is coming back, but this guy has just been fantastic this season. I think he's wide receiver 7 PPR scoring on the season, which is just crazy. I thought the guy was going to have a decent year, but definitely not like he's been doing. But he's going to get targets. We know that. He's the deep threat in this offense. He's been scoring a lot of touchdowns, 17, 30, 23. That game versus Houston, but then 21 points versus Baltimore. The guy's definitely breaking out. He's a very talented wide receiver. Carson Wentz is not afraid to get him the ball. Good spot versus Jacksonville. Not too scared of T.Y. Hilton coming back. So $6,300 just seems a bit too cheap. I think we'll plug him in for right now. Again, he can be replaced if we want to go with a cheaper receiver, then go with an Adams. I no problem at all taking out Michael Pittman. I don't think he's a lock this week by any means. Just I think he will fit nicely in this lineup. And then just to find a cheaper wide receiver, a guy that was sticking out to me all week, Cole Beasley, $5,200. I do not have Josh Allen or any Bills exposure in my lineup yet. Now, I would like to get some exposure to the Bills. I think they're going to bounce back in a big way versus the Jets and the way he's been utilizing the offense recently the past 3 weeks after a bad 2-week stretch versus Houston and KC. I mean, he's had 13, 11, 9 targets the past 3 weeks and fantastic matchups the past month or so now. And the good matchups just keep coming versus the Jets. So I think he's one of the safer options you can pick from, especially at only $5,200. If he's going to get us around 10 targets and catch like 6 to 8 of them, even if the yardage isn't anything huge, maybe he gets into the end zone, but he's still a safe PPR play on a site like DraftKings. So don't mind Cole Beasley. I think he's actually a guy we're going to plug in. So if we do that, it leaves us $5,100 left for our last 2 spots. There's a couple cheap tight ends I like this week. Probably won't be dipping into the 2K range, although if you want to play O.J. Howard as a punt option, I wouldn't hate that in tournaments. I think as low as I'd go in cash games is probably a guy like Jared Cook at $3,200. Minnesota has been kind of tough versus the tight end position this year, but I'm not really one to care about matchups too much, especially for tight ends, because that can be a bit noisy depending on what teams they face so far this year. But Cook typically gets around like 5 to 7 targets. He'll probably be around 25 to 50 yards, maybe gets to the end zone. $3,200 just seems a bit too cheap. Like, he plays the majority of the snaps, runs a lot of routes. I think he's totally fine. Dan Arnold has been getting peppered with targets ever since he joined Jacksonville. has like a 30+% target share on this offense since he joined. Week 5 versus Tennessee, when he started playing like full amount of snaps for Jacksonville, 8, 5, 10, 7 targets. I think he's like a 42% target share on this offense, which is kind of crazy for a tight end that's only $3,500. Tyler Conklin right below him at $3,400 seems to get like 4 to 7 targets every single week. I think he's fine. Plus the Chargers have been terrible versus tight ends this year. Muth at $3,900 got 2 touchdowns. Monday night versus the Chicago Bears. No Eric Ebron. He's tight end 1 for Pittsburgh, and he's been utilized. 7, 7, 6 targets the past 3 weeks. 21, 14, 12.8 fantasy points. Below 4K facing Detroit. He is certainly on my radar and in my player pool this weekend. If you're spending up, Dallas Goedert's fine versus Denver. Kyle Pitts, basically a wide receiver. Like, it would feel better if he had a wide receiver tag here because you'd be thinking, well, that's pretty cheap for a guy like Kyle Pitts. But as a tight end, it just doesn't feel as good. But he plays like 70 to 80% of his snaps as a wide receiver, whether it be in the slot or out wide. Like, only 20% of his snaps are inside so far this season. So basically, just think of him as a wide receiver. For me, I'm just going to plug in one of these cheap tight ends. I guess we can go with Dan Arnold if we have to mess around with that just to fit in whoever we want at the end. That's fine. There's really not much separating Dan Arnold, Tyler Conklin, and Jared Cook, to be honest. If we happen to do that, that leaves us $6,700 left for the last spot, which is a couple of players I'm not super fond with, to be honest. Mike Williams, I think, is a better turnip play. Tyler Lockett, I guess, is fine if they happen to get Russell Wilson back. Leonard Fournette Cordell Patterson is $6,600. If this was a tournament lineup, I would plug in Cordell Patterson because he'd be a run back option with Dak Prescott and Amari Cooper. So, with it being a cash game, though, I'm not really sure I want to play Patterson in cash. Like, he's fine. He's close carries and probably 5 to 10 targets, which means a pretty nice floor. Like, it's going to be hard for him to bust with that kind of utilization, but I'm not really sure I want to go with that route. We could play Leonard Fournette, though, because with all the wide receivers and pass-catching options out for Tampa, we know they're going to put up points. Leonard Fournette, RB1 in this offense, didn't have a great week versus New Orleans, but they're a very tough run defense. But besides that, 17, 30, 21, 17 points, gets you around 15 to 20 carries with a handful of targets. And again, if all those guys are out, including Chris Godwin, the ball is going to go somewhere in this offense. Leonard Fournette could just be utilized more. $6,100 should be winning this game. I think he's just a bit too cheap, in my opinion. Actually, the cheapest he's been the past 3 games he's played. So that's going to leave us $600 left remaining. We can upgrade a player or two. If you want to move up from Cole Beasley, that's fine. If you wanted to move up from Pittman and get another Tampa Bay wide receiver, you could go with a guy like Mike Evans at $6,100. You have Deontay Johnson at $6,800. So, like I said, there's a couple of ways you could finagle with this. You could drop Najee Harris to a guy like Jonathan Taylor. Because let's say you didn't want 2 Pittsburgh players, you could easily just substitute Najee Harris out. You could take out, I guess we had Mike Evans in there. Plug in Deontay Johnson, leaves you $8,000 left. Now you have Dalvin Cook. So there's definitely some flexibility here. Now I did mention I wanted to see what it would look like if we happen to put Devontae Adams in a lineup instead of going completely mid-range at wide receiver. So we'll probably take out a guy like Beasley. We'll take out, not Dearness Johnson. That was Deontay for a second. And also we could play around the tight end too. Like if you want to drop down Dan Arnold to, I don't know, let's say Tyler Conklin or Jared Cook. You can certainly do that. I have no problem with that. There's a lot of plays that are very similar on the slate and very similar prices. It's just kind of picking whichever one you prefer the most. But if you wanted to go Devontae Adams in this slate, you'll probably have to go with like a dirt cheap option like Tyler Johnson at $3,300 in addition to him just to make that work. But Tyler Johnson, if Chris Godwin's out, he's going to slide right into that role and he's going to get targets. Like I would not be surprised if he sees 5+ targets at $3,300 from Tom Brady in a great matchup versus Washington, good game environment. Should be pretty high scoring. I like that a lot. Like Johnson does not need to do much whatsoever to hit value. The problem is we're probably not going to know Chris Godwin's status until very close to lock, so that's really going to suck for us. Just make sure you guys keep up to date on the news for that. But if we plug in Tyler Johnson, we leave Dan Arnold in there if you want to. That leaves us $7,000 left, which leaves you a slew of good players. You have Zeke at $7,000, CeeDee Lamb, Keenan Allen, Mike Evans, Aaron Jones, even Deontay Johnson. So like I said, lots of ways to go on this site to make some pretty darn good lineups. Just make sure you check out on who's in, who's out before you lock in your lineups on Sunday afternoon. But with that being said, that'll be it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become a Fish member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. Optimizers, ownership projections, cheat sheets, data sheets, all that fun stuff. Link can be found down below. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by PrizePicks, just you versus the projections. And as of right now, if you're new signing over there, you can use code CPEN to get a free money bonus. That's an instant deposit match up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. I think that'll be it. I'll stop rambling and stay tuned for the Core Plays video scheduled to go later this evening.